He was the forgotten founding father, until his story was reborn in the spotlight of Broadway. But long before the fame, before the legacy, before the name echoed in theaters across the world, there was a boy born out of hardship, driven by ambition, and destined to shape a nation. This is the story of Alexander Hamilton, an immigrant, a revolutionary, a genius, and a man whose pen was mightier than any sword. From the chaos of the Caribbean to the heart of the American Revolution, from scandal to statesmanship, from honor to tragedy, his life was anything but ordinary. Join us as we uncover the real story behind the legend. This is the life of Alexander Hamilton. Before we start the story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. There is another request. Please also mention your city name and the time when you are watching this video in the comment box. So let's get started. Hamilton was born on the Caribbean island of Nevis in either 1755 or 1757. His father, the Scottish trader James Hamilton, and mother, Rachel Faucette Lavien, weren't married. Rachel was still married to another man at the time of Hamilton's birth, but had left her husband after he spent much of her family fortune and had her imprisoned for adultery. Hamilton's father abandoned the family in 1766, and his mother died 2 years later. Hired as a clerk in a trading company on St. Croix when he was just 11, Hamilton gained wider attention after he published an eloquent letter describing a hurricane that had hit the island in 1772. Locals helped raise money to send him to America to study, and he arrived in New York in late 1772, just as the colonies were gearing up for a war for independence from Great Britain. While studying at King's College in New York, now Columbia University, Hamilton got involved in the colonial cause, writing pamphlets like A Full Vindication of the Measures of Congress, in which he defended the First Continental Congress's proposal to embargo trade with Britain. When the Revolutionary War began, he was commissioned to lead an artillery company in the Continental Army and fought bravely in the battles of Trenton and Princeton, among others. By 1777, he had captured the attention of the Army's commander-in-chief, General George Washington, who gave him a position on his staff. Hamilton's writing prowess and military skills helped him thrive as Washington's aide-de-camp, and built his reputation in revolutionary society. In 1780, he married Elizabeth Schuyler, the daughter of a wealthy and influential New York landowner and military officer. They would have 8 children together, many of whom went on to have celebrated careers in law, politics, and the military. Elizabeth remained a key source of loyalty and stability for him throughout the many tumultuous years to come. Hamilton left Washington's staff in 1781, but returned to the Army briefly later that year when Washington gave him a field command at the Battle of Yorktown. In that decisive clash, Hamilton acquitted himself brilliantly, leading a successful assault that contributed to the surrender of British General Lord Charles Cornwallis. Appointed by Washington in 1781 to command a light infantry battalion in Marquis de Lafayette's division, Hamilton helped lead the attack at the Battle of Yorktown in Yorktown, Virginia, which would become the war's last major land battle. The siege lasted from September 28 to October 19, 1781, with the French attacking the British fort at Redoubt 9 and Hamilton attacking Redoubt 10 simultaneously. The double-pronged advance led General Cornwallis to surrender. In Hamilton's day, showing courage on the field of battle was one of just a few ways for an unknown person to win fame, says historian Michael E. Newton, author of Alexander Hamilton, The Formative Years. Hamilton had a genius and was hardworking but did not come from an illustrious family like most of the founding fathers. He knew that winning glory in battle would make him famous and help him further his career. Brendan McConville, professor of history at Boston University, adds that Hamilton had always been sensitive about his humble roots, so it was important to him to prove himself during the war. He had been with Washington as a key aide throughout most of the war, but wanted glory on the battlefield, he says. Hamilton saw victory on the battlefield as a way to win reputation. Initially, according to Newton, command of the assault on Redoubt 10 was given to someone else. Hamilton objected, claiming it was his turn and that he had seniority. When Washington overturned the previous decision and gave Hamilton the command, Hamilton rushed to his friend and second-in-command, Nicholas Fish, and exclaimed, "We have it. We have it. The Patriots' strategy in the attack was to approach the redoubts, in silence with guns unloaded, encircle the enemy and force them to surrender quickly with few casualties, according to Newton. It was a surprise night assault on a moonless night. They did not want to give themselves away with flashes and the sound of guns, McConville adds. Bayonets were to be used to avoid giving away specific locations, and silence was ordered. The plan worked. Hamilton's troops took control of the redoubt within 10 minutes, and with few American deaths. And the victory earned Hamilton the reputation he sought. Hamilton's report of the assault on Redoubt 10 was published in newspapers around the country, but Hamilton made no mention of his own accomplishments that day despite heaping praise on those who served under him, Newton says. Lafayette's report of the assault was also printed in these newspapers, and he heaped abundant praise upon Hamilton for his actions at Yorktown. As a result, the entire country heard about Hamilton's bravery and leadership. Work on the U.S. Constitution. After the war, Hamilton studied law, passed the New York bar and set up a practice as an attorney in New York City. In 1787, when the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia to overhaul the Articles of Confederation, Hamilton was chosen as one of 3 delegates from New York. He famously made a 6-hour speech about his own plan for a strongly centralized government, drawing criticism that he wanted to create a monarchy. Though Hamilton ended up having little influence on the Constitution itself, he played an important role in its ratification. Along with James Madison and John Jay, Hamilton published a series of 85 essays defending the new document to the American people. Hamilton wrote no fewer than 51 of these Federalist Papers, and they would become his best-known writings. Secretary of the Treasury. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. He appointed Hamilton as the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. Seeking to provide lasting financial stability for the new nation, Hamilton argued for the importance of a national banking system and the federal government's assumption of state debts. Hamilton's financial policies faced strong opposition from Madison and Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, who thought they put far too much power in the hands of the federal government. Chartered in 1791 and modeled on the Bank of England, the First Bank of the United States succeeded in fueling economic growth and marked the high point of Hamilton's influence on the new nation. Meanwhile, debate continued to rage within Washington's cabinet over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. By 1793, when war broke out between Great Britain and France, the divide between Hamilton, who favored neutrality, and Jefferson, who wanted the United States to back France, had begun to shape the nation's first political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Reynolds Pamphlet. Hamilton left his Treasury post in 1795 and returned to his law practice in New York. When Washington stepped down after 2 terms, Hamilton drafted the majority of Washington's farewell address, which memorably warned about the dangers of excessive political partisanship and foreign influence. Hamilton continued to exert influence behind the scenes in the administration of Washington's successor, John Adams, and the animosity between them would divide the Federalist Party and help ensure victory for Jefferson in the 1800 presidential election. Before that, any hope Hamilton had of ascending to the nation's highest office himself had been dashed by his involvement in America's first prominent sex scandal. In the infamous Reynolds Pamphlet, published in 1797, Hamilton went public with his affair with a married woman, Maria Reynolds, in order to clear his name from any suspicion of illegal financial speculation involving her husband, James. Hamilton and his wife, Eliza, suffered far worse than this humiliation in 1801, when their eldest son, Philip, was killed in a duel he had entered to defend his father's name. Philip's opponent, George I Eaker, had given a speech in which he accused Hamilton of being a monarchist. As the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, Alexander Hamilton built the foundations of the national banking system and wielded more power in the earliest years of American democracy than any other man beside George Washington. Yet unlike Washington and unlike his longtime nemesis Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton never served as U.S. President, not only because he died in a duel by the hands of Aaron Burr. In fact, as any fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda's blockbuster hip-hop musical Hamilton knows, Hamilton torpedoed his own presidential ambitions for good in 1797, when he published a tell-all pamphlet about the sordid details of his earlier affair with a married woman, Maria Reynolds, and the blackmail payments he made to her husband to cover up the affair. Complete with illicit meetings, payments of hush money, and allegations of corruption, the Reynolds affair had all the trappings of a modern-day political sex scandal, and was all the more shocking for being the first such drama in U.S. history. Maria Reynolds approaches Alexander Hamilton. According to Hamilton's version of events, which he shared with the world in 1797, Maria, probably pronounced Mariah, Reynolds came to his family home in Philadelphia in the summer of 1791 and asked to speak to him in private. The 23-year-old blonde presented herself as a damsel in distress, telling the Treasury Secretary that her abusive husband, James Reynolds, had left her and their young daughter to run off with another woman. Maria said she was destitute, and asked for money to help her get to friends in New York. At the time, Hamilton was at the height of his influence as Treasury Secretary, and could be considered the second most powerful man in the United States. His outspoken style earned him many enemies, which, as biographer Ron Chernow has written, should have made him especially watchful of his reputation. And yet that night, Hamilton took a 30-note bill to the rooming house where Maria Reynolds was staying. She led him upstairs where, in his words, it was quickly apparent that other than pecuniary consolation would be acceptable. They began a sexual relationship, meeting often at Hamilton's own home after his devoted wife, Eliza, took their children to visit her father in Albany. Soon enough, Maria's husband, James Reynolds, confronted Hamilton via letter and demanded $1,000, the equivalent of nearly $25,000 today, to keep quiet about the affair. Hamilton paid the full amount in 2 installments by January 1792, but Reynolds stayed in Philadelphia despite his promise to leave town. He even encouraged Hamilton to resume the affair with his wife, who claimed to be devoted to her powerful lover. That spring, Reynolds repeatedly asked Hamilton for smaller amounts in loans, until finally Hamilton stopped seeing Maria for good in the summer of 1792. In November, James Reynolds and an associate, Jacob Clingman, were arrested and imprisoned for their involvement in a scheme to defraud the government by posing as the executors of deceased Revolutionary War veterans to get their back pay. While out on bail, Clingman approached his former employer Frederick Muhlenberg, a congressman from Pennsylvania, and claimed that Reynolds had been involved in illegal speculation with none other than Alexander Hamilton. With 2 colleagues from Virginia, James Monroe and Abraham Venable, Muhlenberg visited James Reynolds in jail and Maria Reynolds at her home, then went to Hamilton's to confront him in person about these suspected illegal dealings. To their surprise and embarrassment, Hamilton came clean about his extramarital affair, even sharing the letters he received from both Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds. Monroe, Muhlenberg and Venable left convinced that Hamilton was innocent of all except adultery, and supposedly promised not to say anything more to anyone. But unbeknownst to Hamilton, Monroe sent copies of the documents Hamilton had shown them to Jefferson, while John Beckley, then the clerk for the House of Representatives, also kept a copy. Over the next several years, Hamilton retired from his cabinet post and went back to New York to his law practice. Maria and James Reynolds split up, with Aaron Burr serving as Maria's attorney, and Maria married Clingman the same day her divorce became official. Then in the fall of 1796, in a series of essays written under the name Phocion, Hamilton threw shade on Jefferson's private life, including a pretty big hint about his rumored relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. In response, the scandal-mongering journalist James Callender struck back hard, writing in the summer of 1797 that not only that Hamilton had his own sexual indiscretions, but that Hamilton had used federal funds to illegally speculate in government securities with Reynolds. Though John Buckley likely gave Callender access to the documents after Federalists fired him as House Clerk, Hamilton himself would blame Monroe. The 2 men nearly got into a duel over it, before, in another supreme irony, Burr interceded to talk them down. For her part, Eliza Hamilton would reportedly carry a grudge against Monroe for years to come. Given the charges against him, Hamilton decided his best option was to come clean about his infidelity so he could defend himself on the speculation charges, which would not only ruin his career but permanently stain the Federalist Party and the U.S. Treasury. To that end, in late August 1797 he published what became known as the Reynolds pamphlet, in which he shared the details of his affair with Maria and the subsequent blackmail payments he made to James Reynolds, including excerpts from their letters. While the Reynolds pamphlet successfully refuted the more serious accusations against Hamilton, the sordid revelations of his affair humiliated his wife and permanently ended any hope he might have had of becoming President of the United States. It didn't destroy his career, however. He continued to exert influence during President John Adams' Federalist administration, until his feud with Adams exploded into a public attack on the incumbent president just before the election of 1800. Adams lost to Jefferson that year, marking the beginning of the end for the Federalist Party. Even beyond his bitter feuding with Jefferson, Hamilton's combative personality and policy-making style brought him into frequent conflicts. According to historian Joanne Freeman, he was involved in no fewer than 10 affairs of honor, or near duels, before the notorious 1804 duel that took his life. Hamilton and Aaron Burr had been political opponents since the debate over the Constitution in 1789. Burr angered Hamilton further by running successfully against Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, for the U.S. Senate in 1791. "I fear Burr is unprincipled both as a public and private man," Hamilton wrote in 1792, adding that, "I feel it a religious duty to oppose his career." He made good on this in 1800, after Federalist divisions led to a tie between Jefferson and Burr, both Democratic Republicans, in the 1800 presidential election. Even though Jefferson had long been his political rival, Hamilton helped sway Federalists in Congress to vote in Jefferson's favor to break the tie and defeat Burr. How did Alexander Hamilton die? Largely sidelined in his role as vice president by Jefferson, Burr decided to run for governor of New York in 1804. After he lost, largely due to the opposition of powerful party rivals, the frustrated Burr fixated on a newspaper article, published during the gubernatorial campaign, which claimed that Hamilton had insulted him at a private dinner. He wrote to Hamilton confronting him about the slight. When Hamilton characteristically refused to back down, Burr challenged him to a duel. On July 11, 1804, Hamilton and Burr met for a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. Both men fired. Hamilton's shot missed. In fact, some historians believe Hamilton never intended to hit Burr, but meant to throw away his shot. Burr's bullet, however, mortally wounded Hamilton, who died the next day of his injuries. He was buried in Trinity Church Cemetery in New York City, where his tomb still stands today. Hamilton the Musical. Centuries after his death, Hamilton's legacy rose in prominence with the 2015 debut of the groundbreaking musical theater production of Hamilton. The performance, written by and starring Lin-Manuel Miranda, offered a new perspective on the Founding Fathers' biography by marrying hip-hop music with Broadway theater. Hamilton dominated at the 2016 Tony Awards with 16 nominations, and the production won 11 Tonys. In July 2020, a filmed version of the musical premiered on Disney.